Good evening. You're listening to or watching Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk, and I have again special guest Dr. Aaron Donaldson with me to discuss the national news of the day. We're going to discuss three topics. There are plenty of topics we could have talked about this week, but first we'll talk about Biden has announced, contradicted my prediction, and then we will talk about Tucker and Don and whether or not there are going to be any TV personalities left within a few weeks. Seems like they're falling like flies. And then we are going to talk about the debt ceiling policies and hot off the press, McCarthy's bill just barely passed. We will talk about that in the third segment. But the first thing we're going to start off with is probably the biggest news politically speaking is Joe Biden officially declared. He was overshadowed by other events, which may have actually been on purpose, that he timed it that way because he didn't want to have that be the number one news story. His handlers are talking about it. A lot of talks about his age, whether or not he's able to do this, and about whether or not he can win, about whether or not he can lose. There's a lot to talk about there. He, of course, his polls are down in the lower 40s consistently, mid to mid 40s, up and down. He has not been able to crack that ground. Again, as I said last week, I think it's mostly due to the price of meat and eggs. That, if he can get that under control, he will probably have no trouble winning. But we're going to talk a little bit about that, about the responses from other people, the Republicans, Donald Trump, DeSantis. What will happen, if any of them run in this 15 minutes or so? Aaron, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that, as we said last week, that when it comes to Joe Biden, he really was never like a strength of the candidate kind of politician, at least not as far as the presidency was concerned. He was elected in clear, context of defeating Donald Trump. That was really what brought people out to elect him.
And the return to normality.
Right. And so there's really no world at all where, he's coming out on a huge dais in some park in Chicago and announcing that he's running for re-election to an audience of millions of people on TV. That's just not, the kind of president that he's been in his first term. And I think that the concerns are justified. One of the big things I found myself wondering is that, presidential politics can be rowdy. And while Donald Trump and DeSantis are the clear frontrunners right now, the folks that people are talking about, it's possible that between now and then you could see major shakeups in terms of the names of folks that could run. And I feel like Biden could really struggle against a new politician, someone that we have not potentially seen. I think he could defeat Donald Trump. He's done that before. Right. I do think DeSantis is weak. He's weaker than he looks. Yes. And I'm not thinking like Nikki Haley or one of those folks could beat him. But if we were to have, some Republican candidate emerge late as not a criminal and not randomly picking fights with Disney, that got enough of the base excited. Our producer says that Tucker Carlson might run for Senate. I've seen people say maybe he wants to run for vice president or president. I don't know.
I don't think Carlson could beat Biden.
We'll get to that for sure. Yeah, but I think Biden could be a weak candidate in almost any circumstance except for when he's running against Donald Trump. I think there the numbers are very much in his favor. And so the Democrats are hoping to just sail through straight line from here till there and just keep business as usual.
I think if the Republicans could nominate Asa Hutchinson or Nikki Haley, they would have a really good chance of winning, but they aren't going to nominate him. I mean, extremely unlikely that they would do. DeSantis was everybody's golden boy, but this Captain Ahab approach to Disney is really just doing him in, along with a bunch of other things. And with Ukraine at stake, with him calling yesterday for a ceasefire in Ukraine, kind of implying that it's both sides' fault rather than the invading force, that's going to put a lot of people on edge. I think if DeSantis wins, it's not a guarantee that he would defeat Biden even. But
Do you see Kamala Harris playing a greater role in the reelection campaign? I said last week that I feel like they kind of wasted her as an opportunity, but maybe the plan now is to have her kind of emerge in the reelection process and to position her better after his second candidacy. Do you think that's likely? Or
They're going to have to make use of her, especially if age does become an issue. Then you've got to have this vitality, but they've
right.
got to rehabilitate her because she said some dumb things about the border, and it hasn't impressed anybody really in her in her what things she said while on tour, and we haven't really seen much from her. They've got to rehabilitate her somehow. She's got to rehabilitate herself, not say stupid things, and that get her into trouble, like, there's nothing I can do about the border, or and other things. And so they'll probably give her a few more chances. They'll probably send her on some other tour, outside the country sometime this summer, and see if she can shine. Maybe she should go to Ukraine and see what she can do. So it'll depend on her as to whether or not she's they're stuck with her. They can't nominate anyone else. So it's really up to is how much it'll be emphasized. We don't know. She does great in a debate.
That was my thought. Was like I was thinking to myself that she's great on the campaign trail. She is very, very good when it comes to, stumping big issues, to responding to the news. I would just love to see her debate Donald Trump. I know that would be a VP president. That would never happen. But
no.
I would love to see that. I think Biden Trump is a boring event, but Kamala Harris debating anyone that is his vice president is going to have my attention. And
let's remember, she was made his VP candidate like within a week after clobbering Biden, taking him to task for some of his votes and his past positions. She nailed him to the wall, and he respected that and said, that's who I need, right? I don't know if she was as impressive in her debate with Pence, but Pence was able to keep it boring, I think, and that's all he really needed to do. But if Trump picks somebody like Scary Carrie to run for VP, she'll clobber him. She'll clobber Carrie Lake wouldn't stand a chance against her. Nikki Haley would be interesting, but I don't think Trump's going to choose Haley.
I don't think that he will, and I'm not sure that she can win the base. I think that's ultimately the equation that matters the most is who's a good fit with Trump. Pence was such a weird choice. I still can't really square. I mean, I know like Indiana, I know that they needed like a grown up in the room, and he was apparently that. But I feel like this next choice is going to be much more of a Trump pick than Pence was.
Yeah, I predicted a couple weeks ago that even if Biden declared that Ro Khanna will run anyways, that's not necessarily bad for Biden, actually. No. Again, and so they might let him do that, let him build up his name for some kind of future run to do that. He won't win. If anything, moving South Carolina to the front, whether or not this was deliberate or not, pretty much locks Biden in, because that's Biden, like a lot of classic Democrats, does very well with the Southern black vote. And that was something that Bernie Sanders couldn't crack in either election. Probably should have spent a lot more time down there, but I don't know if it would have mattered. And South Carolina just has been the deciding point of so many elections. And now that it's being moved in front of Iowa and New Hampshire, it's probably going to pretty much be deciding for the future. I think it's good that they took it out of a mostly all-white state to start off with, because when you're starting off with Iowa and New Hampshire and Nevada, and then finally you get to South Carolina. I mean, it's again, South Carolina determined it pretty much for Obama against Hillary Clinton way back in 2008. I mean, she did kind of make a bit of a comeback, but really didn't. He never caught up to him after that. And it follows by Super Tuesday, which has a lot of the Southern vote as well. I just the way I'm seeing it, I don't see any Democratic challenger, even if they run, being able to do much against Biden. I think Biden can win it if he doesn't have major health issues, and or show himself to be confused during debates and the rest. And like I said, there are a lot of people who thought maybe that would have happened if Trump had not been so weird about interrupting every time. And just, we talked about that last week. It allowed Biden to be Biden. He just needed a few lines at that point, trying to get, so I don't know. But then again, Reagan kind of got weird in the first debate against Mondale, too. It didn't hurt him all that much. He lost a few points and then managed to make a big deal of, his opponent's youth and inexperience in the second debate, when age became kind of issue after he kind of blew it in the first debate. So I imagine Biden can do something like that. I'm not, but I'm just trying to think of, what it looks like it's going to be Biden versus Trump. What are the chances of Trump winning? It looks like the Georgia people are going to be making a decision in the summer as to whether they're going to be prosecuting. I think they were going to be prosecuting. And it's hard to see the center. The best that happens is for the Republicans is if the center sits out the election.
I would be surprised if like a flub or a confusion moment is what sunk Biden. Again, when you look at the alternative, Donald Trump is just a barn fire of flubs and confusion and nonsense. And the fact that people are electing Biden to stop Trump means that like it really would have to be kind of a major health scare. But he could also get beaten on the left now that you mentioned that. I'm thinking about that. And it's the same equation where Biden is just kind of boring. And I worry. He's spoken to the press less than I think pretty much any president in recent memory, if not history. I was seeing a report on that. He does not speak to the press very often. They've played him as a very boring candidate. They've really just kind of, as far as I'm concerned, they've kind of kept him in the back pocket and kept him out of the public limelight, except to stand up and take legislative wins when he can. And I think that means that if everything goes normal, then everything should go fine. But if there's a major health issue or major health scare, it would be interesting to see what would happen, because I mean, obviously Kamala Harris would then probably be the front runner, but it would be very fascinating to see how that played out.
Let's also remember Trump isn't all that far behind Biden in age.
No.
And so, for him to try to bring up the age issue would be kind of silly.
And he's way ahead of Biden. I mean, Biden is notorious for not being great on mic and for saying things that he shouldn't, but he is a career politician who understands the limelight and ways that, as far as like stakes, that Donald Trump just does not understand. Donald Trump has lived under the glare of the camera, but it's always been in his own terms. He's always been the person in the chair saying you're fired. He's had to answer to viewers. That's very different than voters. And Biden has lived in that world where he's had to square the nonsense that he may say off the script with like the public at large. And so I feel like they both, as far as their careers are concerned, the decks are stacked in Biden's favor here. And as you said, come on, man, was a kind of masterful stroke of old fellow politics that worked really well in that moment for Biden. So.
Yeah, I also just don't say. I try to think. Okay, will Hunter Biden become an issue? It's not getting traction. I mean, no. The more we learn about it, the more it looks like okay, maybe he cheated on some taxes, lied on an application for a gun, which would probably put him in favor with some people in the country, right? I mean, but nothing really sexy, nothing that's as we've talked about it before, the Burisma thing in Ukraine is a dead end. So is there something in China that would do it? Other than that, it's really just the economy. People are upset about Biden because of how he planned out the Afghan withdrawal when it was kind of chaotic, but that's going to be 3 years in history by the time we get to the election. Nobody is, the Republicans were trying to blame Sudan on him. I saw one meme saying, 2 embassies lost under Biden, 0 under Trump. I mean, I'm just trying to think of any other way other than he some major thing happens that Biden flubs, but he's surrounded himself with really capable people, just like Dianne Feinstein has, right? And I just don't see that is I don't see what takes Biden out other than a young, youthful, energetic candidate that the Republicans put forward, and it doesn't look like they're going that route.
It's a really interesting election. Like at the presidential level, typically what you have are candidate-driven politics, and you've got people that are like at some level a borderline celebrity or like a genuine celebrity. Like the critique of Barack Obama when he came up was that he was like a mini celebrity, even though he really had no status at that point. But he was up and coming, and like it was a meteoric rise. What we have right now are two politicians that like nobody really likes, but they're the front runner, and they're the people who are going to win the base. The math is gonna deal them into the game. And so instead of the election being a referendum on any one individual, it really is a question of just what happens between now and then, and whether or not something, catastrophic issue-wise can be significant enough to defeat an incumbent. And that's weird. I don't know that I've seen an election like that in recent memory where, like the last time we ran this around, it was Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. That was candidate-driven politics par excellence, and
sure.
And that's not what we have right now. It's very fascinating.
Half of the Republicans in Florida are endorsing Trump, not DeSantis. Some private people who've donated to DeSantis aren't supporting him now. They see him as a potential loser. I mean, when you get the Club for Growth criticizing you because you're attacking the number one private employer in Florida over nothing, we'll be covering this, but. Again, we're sort of covering it in a nonchalant way because it wasn't rolled out as a big deal.
Right. And that's smart. That's been Biden's brand since the very beginning. He's brilliant. He's not Trump. Just vote for him. Swallow the bitter medicine and vote for him.
We'll be talking about this in the future, obviously.
For sure.
They can find $1 billion judgment against you if you commit hate speech. But just to remind everyone watching, there's no such thing as hate speech. Hate speech is speech people hate, usually the people in power. The truth is, all speech, except speech that encourages people to imminent illegal action, like go shoot that guy. Short of that, there's no hate speech. All of it's allowed under the United States Constitution.
Okay, big news in the media. Tucker Carlson appears to have been summarily fired. There's a lot of speculation as to why. He's got this lawsuit from the former producers. She's all over the media right now talking about what a jerk he was and what everybody else is. I mean, come on, she was in there. She acts like she's shocked, but she worked for Fox News since 2017 and even did a stint before that. But at any rate, we'll be hearing about her. But it came Monday morning. Friday night, he had closed out his show saying, "We'll see you next week." And then there's even a meme going around saying, "Oh, Tucker's woke. He woke up and found out he didn't have a job," right? So it's rumors that Russian television has offered him a job. Appears to have been debunked. So in the meantime, Don Lemon also out, and a lot of questions as to why he was out and how he was let go. Some people are attributing it to the I'm forgetting his name, but his discussion with the East Indian American candidate for president, over racism in the history, and Don Lemon was kind of cold to him. I thought his coldness was appropriate based on what the guy was saying, but I'm not mainstream America. I don't know. Other rumors that that he was being abusive to staff and the rest, but there's no clear reason as to why either of them were fired. But the impact is potentially big. Fox's stock dropped hugely, more than it did after the settlement, after Tucker went, because he's their big ticket item. He's their star, right? And so they've got people in there who are just not talking about him, apparently. Don Lemon, less of an impact, but still a big day. This happened in the same morning, almost like, there was something astrological going on. Aaron, this is kind of your area. What do you got to say about it?
Well, I think that Don Lemon getting fired seemed a little late. The comments that he made about Nikki Haley being, past her prime, and the kind of like climate that he created at CNN was definitely not new. It was really just a question of whether or not there would be accountability there. And I think it should have been closer to the moment, closer to the event to establish that accountability. But I think, aside from the fact that we have two male misogynists being ousted in cable news, you really can't compare the two. Because Tucker Carlson has been a staple of hate speech since 2016 when he started his show. In 2017, he took over for Bill O'Reilly's time slot in what used to be the no spin zone. And if you remember, Eric, last week on this show, I did predict that Tucker Carlson was going to lock.
You did. You thought it would be a little bit further away because they would do it, but you did predict that he was going to be out.
My hope is that he goes the way of Bill O'Reilly and Glenn Beck. I asked my college students if they've heard of either of those two people, and they have not. 20-year-olds today have never heard of Bill O'Reilly. They've never heard of Glenn Beck. They do know who Tucker Carlson is, however, because this is a man that lied about 2020. He called COVID-19 a hoax. He said the vaccination effort for COVID-19 was the single deadliest mass vaccination event in history. That's not true. He's a misogynist. He says that trans people are a cancer. He says you should beat up educators that want to educate trans students about sex and gender. He said that immigrants moved to this country to make us poorer, to make us dirtier. He says white supremacy is a hoax, while at the same time he denies racial violence. He promotes the Great Replacement theory. He says that white folks created civilization and had some very, very choice words referring to Iraqis as like primates and things. This man has been a stain on the public media landscape for a decade or more now.
Right.
And I think that the fact that they both happened at the same time and that they are both staples at their network, and that CNN covered Fox and Fox covered CNN and nary the two crossed, that was all very fascinating. But when I made that prediction last week, it was very much wishful thinking. It was me, I don't have a great track record on here. It's the first one I've gotten right for my predictions. And so it was like,
and one thing you left out is that Russian state propaganda television airs his stuff unedited. I mean, so because he was pro-Putin, essentially.
Right, and there are documented trips to Russia that he has taken that can be very conspiratorially assessed if we want to ask the kinds of questions that Tucker Carlson would ask on his show. I think that, for me, to see him going is the end of an era. The fact that it hurt Fox's brand more than the Dominion settlement, I think, says very much that he was a huge part of like who they are now. He has transformed them from Bill O'Reilly into something much more vehement, something much more explicitly racist and pointed. He's done all of it with the guise of plausible deniability through his kind of questioning faces. These are very famous of his. I've had students write papers about his face and facial expressions because he's just asking questions. He's just asking questions, except for when he's not. And when he's not, he's promoting conspiracy. He is promoting white supremacist ideology. Fox has had no desire to hold him accountable in the past, which makes this move very fascinating.
He also said
has a cool episode about it where they speculate, but go ahead.
He also said in some of the emails had some really choice words for Fox executives. He even said he hated Donald Trump. Some people say that's the reason he's out. And when we think about him, first of all, is now I don't know what the big deal is, because I don't know that he's any crazier than Sean Hannity or Pirro or Dobbs. For crying out loud, Dobbs is an election denialist and a birther and everything else, but he seems to get away with it, I think, because they just figure, oh, he's a cranky, crazy old man or something. I don't know, but he does it. I'm not sure that are they really going to be changing their brand? Because in some ways, I think Hannity is worse than Carlson. Carlson was at least for he used to be a quasi-intellectual. He wrote for not New Republic, National Review, and used to be on Crossfire on CNN. He was on MSNBC debating Catherine Vander. I always get her name wrong, of Nation Magazine, and used to be kind of reasonable, but just went off the deep end somehow. I don't know. There's so many reasons he could have been fired. Maybe it was just a combination of them all. They just said, you know what, this is just, it's toxic. We need to get rid of it. It's bad for the brand.
There's some speculation that Rupert Murdoch himself was the person that did the firing. I think it was Vanity Fair that was reporting that he was the person that made the choice, and it had something to do with Carlson's very recent turn to like overt religious tropes, telling people that they have to pray for problems to go away and things. The reporter was saying that makes Rupert Murdoch uncomfortable, whereas all the other stuff is fine. I think that Tucker Carlson is worse than Sean Hannity. When I look at Sean Hannity, I see a partisan lackey. When I look at Tucker Carlson, I see a rampant and unapologetic white supremacist. Lou Dobbs is an old fuddy-duddy. To me, he's Bill O'Reilly, just kind of lingering on. Sean Hannity will sit down with Donald Trump, go on stage with Donald Trump. He likes Donald Trump, which in many ways does make him more dangerous. But Tucker Carlson, has showed that he can play to the audience. He can hate Donald Trump and convince everyone that matters, including Donald Trump himself, that he's just a huge fan. And more importantly than that, I think that his embrace of like some of this great replacement stuff has been really significant. I think a lot of people point to Trump for Charlottesville and things like that. But one of the things that I heard, again, this is on the media, that I really appreciated, is that Trump was the bullhorn, but Hannity was the like everyday ticker tape, like constant drumming of the message into people's ears. He was the ideologue. Trump had tweets. Hannity had, an hour-long program night after night after night after night that monopolized the imaginations of a lot of Americans.
There's another theory again, where I'm going to bring up Abby Grossberg again. She is the person who was fired and is now suing Fox News for apparently having been sort of intimidated into giving perjurious testimony for the Dominion suit. And she's got her own lawsuit, and out of it came her conversations with Giuliani, which had not been produced in the Dominion lawsuit, which means that somebody at Fox perjured themselves. We talked about that, and basically undermined her. And I'm wondering if things have broken in Discovery or other things that she's produced in that case, or may have, that they just decided that more stuff is going to come out about Tucker, and that's going to compromise them, and they want to preempt it by saying, oh, hey, Tucker doesn't have a job here.
It have to be so bad. So much has come out from him. Like so many, there's stuff from like former radio interviews that he's done where, he has said things about women. He said things about people of color that are objectionable and explicit, and Fox News has covered for him. So it would have to be something truly catastrophic, or I think, the article I mentioned earlier, just a beef. He just made the wrong person mad, and that person was cranky enough to get rid of him. But it would have to be someone with a lot of power.
He aspired apparently at one time to be the new William Buckley, but
he's part of that famous back and forth with Jon Stewart on Crossfire, where those folks confronted Jon Stewart about being, the go-to for people's news, and Jon Stewart confronts the news people for not being good enough at their job. As a debate coach, I've often, looked at that with my students and talked about, the value of that discourse at that time, even though it's a kind of, cable news style debate.
And Crossfire was canceled soon after that. Some people attribute it to Stewart having just basically trashed the brand in that.
He runs circles around them. It's very clear because, again, as a comedian, he has far lower stakes. Legitimacy for a comedian is far easier than Tucker Carlson there with his bow tie trying to be a serious newsman while asking all sorts of vague questions. But I think that really that was a time and a moment where, like, you saw someone on the far left and some folks on the the right and the middle, like sitting down and having a conversation, and it just doesn't happen anymore.
No, it doesn't.
He is now. He says he's very explicit about it. He's given up on the debate. This is a war for the soul of America. and he does not
There-
think liberals are worth talking to at all.
Yeah, there is no. I actually missed the idea of Crossfire. It wasn't being implemented well. It was like reduced to everything. But Crossfire, even Fox for a while had Hannity and Combs, right? But then people just didn't want a liberal on there, so he was off. I mean, but Buckley used to have firing line, which sometimes had panel debates, and sometimes he mixed it up. It was like two right wingers and two left wingers on each side arguing about the war on drugs. It was high level stuff. Buckley was a total jerk and arrogant as anything, but there was depth to him, and he actually kind of moved away from a hard right position before he died. And one of the things, and of course now his son, after endorsing Obama in 2008, was barred from National Review, the magazine that Buckley started. So everything's really gone downhill, and people have either, the conservative intellectuals, you don't hear from anymore, or they go off the deep end, like Thomas Sowell, who's like completely MAGA these days, and no nuance whatsoever. I mean, there was a time when he attacked the bell curve, right? As saying that this actually wasn't consistent with conservative values. There's no nuance to him anymore. He's on YouTube saying that slavery wasn't that bad. So saying it as a black historian. I mean, I just look at it. There's not much left. There is no right-wing intelligentsia anymore that at least is prominent, that gets airtime. They're there. They're on Bulwark and the rest, but they're the never Trumpers. They're not at the front and center stage anymore. So it's sad. I think this is sad. I sort of hope maybe there's some element in Fox News that wants to like reclaim a little bit of integrity to it, but I'm not. They got to get rid of Hannity and Dobbs too to be able to do that.
It'll be so interesting to see who they replace Tucker Carlson with, and it is so evident that they right now have nobody. They have no plan. I can't remember the name of the guy that took over. He was fine, but he's definitely not the solution. I think that it's fascinating to take a look at his career and the way that, in my opinion, he's really mobilized and encouraged people like Gates and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like, his rhetoric is so bombastic, it is so inflammatory, it is so unapologetic that I think he really did, foster a shift. Again, Bill O'Reilly framed himself as, that old school compassionate conservative. Compassionate conservatism was a thing. That was a thing that conservatives cared about, was compassion at some point, family values and things. And they'll still carry this family values moniker while they're spreading hate and fear about trans people. But the compassion side of conservatism is gone. It is completely gone. The desire to debate, the desire to share space with people that disagree. I know we're about to pivot to this debt ceiling debate, and I think that's just an exceptional example of where there used to be a Republican Party that at some level understood Democrats and Republicans to be on one team, which is America. We differ in terms of our parties, but compassion was part of compassionate conservatism, because at the end of the day, we're all Americans. Well, That's not true anymore. Now we have this liberal Democratic elite with their agenda, and they have to be stopped at all costs because they're promoting the deadliest vaccines in history or some such nonsense. And that is a devastating shift in rhetoric for the right, and he's a big part of that.
These are not new expenses. It's paying bills that have already been incurred.
Why wouldn't we sit down now, set a budget, set a path to get us to a balanced budget, and let's start paying this debt off and make sure the future generation has as many opportunities as we do?
It is something that should be done without conditions. We should not be negotiating around it.
The extraordinary measures are things like not investing government employee contributions into the retirement funds, things where you can catch up later and make everyone whole.
Final segment. the debt ceiling. The politics are reaching ahead. Of course, we have this crazy system in the United States that normally Dave explains so well. He's done it several times. But we have this rule that got passed because during a height in Republican politics, when they were able to convince everybody that the budget deficit was the worst thing in the world for the economy, even though Republicans tend to run it up. I mean, Reagan ran up the biggest debt in the country's history. In first term, he raised it higher than all of the prior budget deficits, all going all the way back to George Washington. Nobody wants to remember that. And that's because he pushed for military Keynesianism, which is a whole other story. But it is, I believe in the 90s, they passed this debt ceiling, which means that you can only borrow money to cover the existing debt and go up a little bit over what had been approved. Now the problem is we're talking about, a lot of people think, oh, it's so we don't spend in the future. We're talking about money that was spent last year. So the money is already spent, and we are owing these bills as a country, and so Congress has to authorize paying those debts. It's insane. It's insane that ever got passed. So in the meantime, several times since then, the Republicans have tried to use it they never do it when a Republican is president. But they did it with Obama 2000 in his first term, even a couple times in the second term, where they threatened to ruin the country's credit rating by not allowing the president to borrow money to cover the increasing debt due to budget increases. And so they use this as an excuse to attack legislation, to do cuts in things. They certainly won't increase taxes, that which would actually take care of a lot of the problem. But they continuously push for this. And right now, they held it up in 2012, and they did it again a couple of years later. And we actually, our credit rating declined a little bit, I think due to Moody. I'm not sure which one. And we have not recovered that. And so here we are at the debt ceiling, where Congress is supposed to approve something, and McCarthy and the Freedom Caucus are saying we need to leverage it to accomplish some reductions in spending, but also to basically repeal everything good that was passed last year and the Inflation Reduction Act and the like, and that's really their agenda. And so they want to negotiate. Well, Biden has taken the stand that Obama didn't take, that probably should have taken. He's basically he's being pressured to negotiate by Republicans and even from Manchin over the past week, who's like, you need to negotiate because we can't have this happen. Well, the Republicans shouldn't let it happen. Why is it the president's up to the president to appease Republicans who are basically holding the economy at hostage? The analogy the Democrats have drawn up is it's negotiating with terrorists. They'll do this every time. And so they need to stop and do it now. And so Biden's stance has been a lot like Al Pacino as the Godfather saying, my offer is this, nothing. I mean, he's basically saying, no, you need to just pass the damn debt limit, the authorizations, and let me do my job. And some people, a lot of commentators are saying that he's being negligent in his politics by not negotiating, but it will just happen over and over and over again. It will not stop. So I'm glad that so far Biden has been willing to call the bluff. I hope he continues to do that. But there are, and I'm going to switch to you in just a minute. I wanted to talk a little bit about there's some scholars who in 2012, when the Republicans were doing the same thing, their name are Neil Buchanan and Michael C. Dorff. It's a Columbia Law Review entitled "How to Choose the Least Unconstitutional Option: Lessons lessons for the president and others from the debt ceiling standoff. We were here 11 years ago. We've been here several times. And it says no matter what, the president is forced into violating the Constitution because the 14th Amendment says you can't deny the debt, which means you're supposed to pay full faith and credit. So by not honoring the debt, the president is against the Constitution. So they suggest he simply ignore the debt ceiling and issue bonds to cover it without congressional approval. Now, this, of course, violates the separation of powers by issuing bonds without their approval. But one way or another, you're going to violate the Constitution. Allowing a default is a violation of the 14th Amendment. So in choosing between the two, I'm wondering if Biden has read this article. Again, look it up, Google it. Neil Buchanan and Michael Dorf. It's an excellent law review article. You just have to read the first couple pages to understand it. You don't have to get into the full legal analysis. But this is the crazy situation we're in, where the president has no choice. And I'm wondering if that's his plan. If it reaches a point, he's just going to issue bonds, let Congress scream about it, and Biden looks strong and they look weak. And McCarthy is panicking, by the way. They did pass his debt ceiling bill. Some Freedom Caucus people voted against, about 4 of them, but it did pass 2017 to 2015. But it has no chance in the Senate. And if it got through the Senate, it would have no chance of surviving a presidential veto. So it's dead in the water. And I think Biden, I hope he just continues to say, you know what, send me the authorization. That's it. If you want to talk about budget cuts, we'll talk about budget cuts. But send me the authorization.
It's a fascinating question to see what happens going forward, because, McCarthy has to negotiate between a caucus within the Republicans that really want to burn the whole thing down. They don't want to pay for anything. They want a government so small you can drown it in a bathtub, they say. And they're willing to do pretty much whatever it takes to accomplish that. And in order to get anything through the House, he's going to have to give them what they want. And also, this is, as you've described, a kind of playing piece that the Republicans generated a long time ago that's just very unnecessary. But there's really no way that he's going to get anything out of the House that is ever going to pass the Senate or get Biden's pen. And so I hope you're right that Biden has another way out. Because my biggest concern that is a question of turn taking, by owning the House of Representatives so far as they do, the Republicans have that first turn, which ultimately can put the buck on Biden and the Democrats in the Senate. And while, most people, hopefully, that pay attention to this know what the debt ceiling is, I think most Americans don't. My understanding of most Americans is they don't want more debt, and the Democrats want more debt, and the Republicans are trying to decrease debt. They've really won the talking point battle on this in terms of just what it means. And so I worry, because I feel like the Democrats will get stuck with the bill. As far as the move is concerned, in my opinion, I think it's irrational, it's petty, and it's expensive. It's irrational because of what you described. This is not a question of saving money going forward. This is whether we should pay our bills in the past. And that, to me, sounds very straightforward. I don't care who you are. If you're a fiscal conservative, you should pay these bills. It's irrational, as you mentioned, because they did not wield this against Donald Trump, who was one of the biggest debt makers that this country has seen. His tax cuts were catastrophic for our debt, and we didn't hear a whisper about this. It's irrational because they never touched the defense spending, and you touched on that. It's petty. I said it's petty because when you look at the way you're supposed to bargain, when you risk something huge, you're supposed to be asking for something huge. When they risk a default on our national debt and a global recession to get what? A repeal of some environmental regulations? What is this for? What are they trying to win? None of this is a take it to the island issue as far as what they are proposing. But what they are risking is global economic calamity. That is, by definition, petty. And it is expensive because I think they're going to get stuff. I think the Democrats will have to negotiate. It's the age-old question where if I show up and say, you owe me $500 and you call me a liar, and I say you owe me $500 and you call me a liar, and then our friend Matt shows up and says, what's going on? And I say, Eric owes me $500, and you say, no, I don't. At some point, Matt's going to be like, just give him $250 to make him go away. Just give him $200. And I just fabricated that. And I feel like that's what they're going to be stuck with. And they're talking about cutting Meals on Wheels. They're talking about cutting COVID-related funds that have places that they need to go in order to continue the recovery from COVID. They're talking about cutting access to debt relief for students, even though the Supreme Court is always going to do that, or is probably already going to do that. Chalk another one up for the petty category. They're talking about cutting programs that are value added. You know, the last thing I'll say on this before throwing it back to you is that when it comes to cutting costs, there are like very different kinds of costs. There are value added costs, value neutral costs, and then just straight expenses. And a value added cost is when I spend $10, I'm going to get 30 next year. That sounds expensive because $10 may be a lot, but 30 is better than 10, so that's value added. We spend it. That's education dollars. That's healthcare dollars. That's infrastructure dollars. That's the stuff that's environmental reform. That's what Democrats go to bat for because that money pays for itself in the future. The value neutral stuff is the stuff that pays for itself. The value lost stuff is the defense spending. Like we spend a bunch on Humvees, we spend a bunch on armor, we spend a bunch on stuff that never gets used or that it turns into some black budget somewhere. It's all out of whack when it comes to their effort. And yet at the same time, they are winning the debate in the discourse. I think when you ask most Democrats or most Republicans in the public, what is the debt ceiling and should it be raised? That a lot of them will give you a lot more of the Republican side of the talking point than not, just because
Sure.
you don't know it's backward looking, you know?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think they said something like 70% of Americans want the Democrats to negotiate. I don't think that matters, though. I don't think that the Democrats would lose a lot of points if they refuse to negotiate. I think what he has to do is claim unilateral power. He has the administrative power to raise taxes. Now, that can be challenged in the court and all that, but all he has to do is raise taxes such that the projection of income based on that raise covers the anticipated debt, and they don't lose their credit rating. I mean, he's gone this far. I think he's got a plan for it, and they know that if they do this every year, this will be the case. The Republicans and the Freedom Caucus will make these demands. I don't know that they're going to negotiate. Maybe the Senate will try to negotiate something, with them, but Biden doesn't have to. He doesn't have to appear to do that. And if they come up and Schumer can go to McCarthy and say, hey, he's crazy up there. He's just going to veto it. So, what do you want to do? And McCarthy is sweating. I mean, he barked at a reporter today when he was asked about, whether they tried to get him to admit that increasing the debt ceiling was to cover money already spent and not future spending. That cutting spending is not going to have any impact on the current debt ceiling amount. So it's just the politics is fascinating, but you just because they've got the talking points in the public and people do think this way, I don't think they'll hold it against Obama, especially if he. Not Obama, Biden, especially if he unilaterally increases estate taxes for people who have $10 million or more. He can do that. He has the power to do that. Doesn't have the right to do that, but he has the power to do that. This is the type of thing that a lot of Americans like. So he just has to be real clear on the message. This is to cover our bills that have already been paid. He hasn't really gotten involved in the discussion publicly yet, but if he's smart, that's what he'll do. He says this is to clarify. This is bills, money we owe that's already spent, not future money.
And also, there's absolutely no reason to couple it with a budget fight. None.
Yeah.
They are totally unrelated things. And that's the real message point that the administration's been leaning on up until this point, which is there is a time and a place to bicker about a budget. It is not when we decide whether or not to pay our bills from last year. That is after the fact. And what we should do is never really I think it's an interesting question, the budget or the debt limit. There's a debate about just how democratic it is, for a prior Congress to impose spending limits on future voters in terms of what they can and can't do. It's a fascinating question. And it's a totally fabricated debate on two fronts. It doesn't need to be there in the first place. It also is not necessarily coupled to the the legislation of the budget itself. He's behind on both of those fronts. But at the end of the day, again, like, I don't know that they're going to be able to get much through that's any different. What gets them? They could lose 4 votes, and they lost 4 votes to get this thing through. Like, what is the better proposal? And they're not giving it up. Like the same caucus that is forcing these cuts that most Americans hate. Most Americans, when it comes to like cutting our deficit, they're smart. They know that we should cut the defense budget and that we should stop like making huge tax cuts for like millionaires and billionaires and things. They're aware that there's ways that we can cut spending without cutting Meals on Wheels and things. But it's the same party in the House of Representatives, the same caucus of the Republican Party that is asking for those unpopular cuts, that is saying there's no way in the world we are ever going to raise the debt ceiling without some kind of associated cuts. That to me seems like a mutually exclusive position, with Biden saying there's no way I'll go with cuts, and with them saying nothing's leaving the House without them. I don't know what breaks first.
I don't know. I mean, McCarthy has a problem with the crazy Freedom Caucus. That's his problem. He does not control. He's not in charge of it. His weakness is being shown, and that's why he's getting testy with reporters. That's and there's going to be, the Senate will pass their own version. It'll be a quote unquote clean debt ceiling bill, and there'll be some filibuster attempts by the Republicans, but they can only go so far, and then they'll have to be a reconciliation meeting between Senate and the House, and we'll see what the Senate says. But if Biden tells them, I'm going to veto anything that involves any cuts of repeal of any of last year's legislation, that's going to be it. It'll be very interesting. Will enough of the Republicans? I mean, McCarthy has a problem because these Republicans, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, they don't have to worry about re-election, while the gerrymandering is in place. I hope Biden stays strong. He's done it so far, even with even Manchin in a panic. Of course, he's got a re-election race coming up too, but
he's fragile.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I don't know that Biden will change it up. It isn't the end of the world if there's a default. We've had one before, and how far will the Republicans go? I think they got to stick and play chicken, and that's what has to happen.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
Okay, this brings us to predictions. Aaron, what do you have for us?
Well, I was right last week, so I'm feeling pretty good about myself. Although this time I just really want you to be right, Eric. My prediction is that Biden and the Democrats are going to fold. I think that in order to get the debt ceiling raised, there's going to have to be cuts. They're probably going to come from some of the environmental policies that the Biden administration proposed and some of the other stuff like Meals on Wheels and stuff. I really want to be wrong about this, but I just think the turn taking is going to play to the Republicans' favor. And unless Trump or Biden pulls out this magic card that you're talking about, just legislating from the Oval Office, I don't see how they get around it.
Okay, well, I am predicting that Tucker Carlson is going to be announcing that he is on a new show. I don't think he's going to try to do the Alex Jones thing on YouTube. That hasn't really worked out for him too well, as you say, O'Reilly. I think that he is going to end up on Newsmax. I think that Newsmax is facing the lawsuits from both still Dominion and Smartmatic. Both OAN and Newsmax are being sued. But today he said, "See you soon." Carlson finally came out of his silence, and I was reading it before the show, and the feeling I have is that he's going to show up, maybe on OAN, but more likely Newsmax, and hope that he can save them, because if they lose a suit, they can't afford a payment like Fox made. If they lose either one of the suits, Dominion or Smartmatic or both, they're going to need some income. And so I'm predicting it'll be Newsmax, possibly OAN, but I think he's going to go on one of those because they need to go for broke.
I hope I never have to talk about him again.
We'll see. All right, that's it for this week. We'll be back next week. Until then, stay informed and stay engaged.